Hello and welcome to AP Biology lesson number 1, cells. So in this course, I'm going to be talking about all the information you need to know for the AP Biology exam. And so we're going to be starting by learning about cells. So cells, of course, if you've taken uh, just any basic level of biology, you would know cells are the building block of life. Cells make up everything in our bodies, in animals, in plants, just all life in general. So they're the building blocks. Now, these cells, they how they become an organism is shown by this drawing. So the cells, they make up tissues. They stack up together, the same types of cells, and they make a certain tissue that performs a certain function. And the cell shape and its type is specific to its function, and the same is with the tissue, right? Like muscle tissues, they expand, they stretch because they need to do that to move your body. And then these tissues, they stack up and combine to make an organ, such as, well, your kidneys, or your skin, or your lungs, right? These tissues, their goal is to perform a certain function, and that function is is done by the organ, right? Like muscles that move your body, bones that give you structure, and so on and so forth. And these organs, they combine to make an organ system. So a bunch of organs work together. So like your mouth and your stomach, your intestines, they all work together to make up the digestive system. So all these organs, after the tissues make up the organs, they make up organ systems which perform like an overall function, or like, eating, that's vital to an organism. And finally, combine a bunch of those organ systems and you're gonna get an organism. But before cells, there are also smaller layers, because of course, cells aren't the smallest thing in the universe. They're obviously atoms. And so these atoms make up molecules, which make up macromolecules, which we'll learn about later. But for now, one of the most important steps is the organelles. Now, these organelles, they come together to make up a cell. Now, each organelle performs a specific cell function that's vital for the cell living and uh the, the organism living in general, right? So a good example of an organelle is like mitochondria. So mitochondria, you may have heard it referred to as the powerhouse of the cell, and that is because it breaks down glucose, food energy, into cellular energy, which is called ATP. We'll also learn about ATP later in this course. But yeah, right now, just know that organelles, they all perform certain functions, such as mitochondria. Without mitochondria, your cell wouldn't have the energy to perform its functions. So that's the kind of organization you see in your body and in all life. Now, life doesn't have to be just multicellular, right? Life can just be made out of one cell. So this is where we get into unicellular, meaning one cell, versus multicellular, meaning an organism with multiple cells. Now, you may be confused, how can an organism survive with only one cell? Well, that's where we get into organisms such as bacteria, right? Bacteria, they are life, they're organisms, but they're only made out of one cell. Or stuff like amoebas, right? They're still made out of one cell. So life can either be unicellular, meaning it's made out of one cell, or multicellular. Now, there are two other terms that are essential to understanding cells other than unicellular versus multicellular, and they're kind of tied in a way to these two terms, unicellular and multicellular. There's also prokaryotic versus eukaryotic. So take a few seconds, just kind of ponder upon these words. Just just try to see if you can figure out what they mean. Just see if you can try to figure out what these terms mean. Now, if you've learned a lot of Greek or Latin, you might realize that the prefix pro, it means something like before, right? Before. And you, it means something like true. And karyotic, it 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 stands for, or not stands for, but it means nucleus, basically. So just putting these words together, before nucleus and true nucleus, you can kind of start to figure out what these two terms mean. So if you don't know, the nucleus is the center of the cell, basically. It's the command center. It carries out cell functions. Now, prokaryotic cells, they do not have a nucleus. They are the cells that came before cells had a nucleus. First, prokaryotic cells came, then eukaryotic cells. But prokaryotic cells, they don't have a true nucleus, and they came before the eukaryotic cells, which have a true nucleus, so they're called prokaryotic because they came before cells had a nucleus, and they don't have a true nucleus for themselves, while eukaryotic cells, they have a true nucleus that carries out all their functions. So prokaryotic cells, the uh the 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 nucleus carries all the DNA of the cell, so prokaryotic cells, all of the DNA is kind of just coiled up in the middle. It's kind of, you know, something like this. There's no real membrane to hold all of the DNA. It's just kind of coiled up in the middle. But a true nucleus, or in a eukaryotic cell, there's a true nucleus, meaning that there's organelle that holds all of this DNA, and the DNA is in this helical shape, kind of like this, right? I mean, I'm sure all of you have seen DNA before, so that's the difference between prokaryotic and eukaryotic cell, or that's at least one of the differences. There are many differences between these two types of cells, but this is the main difference, right? Prokaryotic cells, they do not have a true nucleus, while eukaryotic cells do have one. And prokaryotic cells, they're less complex. So prokaryotic cells, their organelles don't have this thing called a membrane, which is basically the outer layer, right, of the or organelle, right? So they lack membrane-bound organelles. So that's what that's another difference between prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. Eukaryotic cells do have membrane-bound organelles like the nucleus, right? There's a membrane and all the DNA is coiled up inside. But prokaryotic cells don't have that. And prokaryotic cells, because of that, and because of the fact that they don't have a true nucleus, they're generally considered less complex. And so prokaryotic cells, they are only found in unicellular organisms. you will never find a multicellular organism that is prokaryotic because that's impossible. Prokaryotic cells aren't complex enough to be a multicellular organism. They're not complex enough to communicate between themselves and form a multicellular organism. And eukaryotic cells, on the other hand, they can be both unicellular and multicellular. Eukaryotic cells, on the other hand, are complex enough to form multicellular organisms, and of course, they can still be unicellular organisms, such as amoebas that you see, you know, like algae, right? Those are unicellular eukaryotic cells, but eukaryotic cells are also our cells and plant cells and animal cells, right? Those are all eukaryotic cells that make up us, and we are multicellular organisms. So this is kind of the key difference between unicellular and multicellular and prokaryotic and eukaryotic. They are not synonymous. So don't make that mistake, because that's a common mistake that students make on the test. It's just unicellular and prokaryotic do not mean the same thing, and multicellular and eukaryotic do not mean the same thing. Prokaryotic cells, they are only unicellular, but eukaryotic cells can be both unicellular and multicellular. And the same is the case vice versa. Unicellular organisms can be both prokaryotic and eukaryotic, while multicellular organisms, they can only be eukaryotic, right? So do not confuse these up, because that's a big that's a huge mistake that you can make on the test. So be careful to make sure you're distinguishing both of those terms and both of those definitions. And I'll see you next time in AP Biology lesson number 2, where we'll get more in depth into the specific organelles of a eukaryotic cell and learn their specific cell functions and structure. And I'll see you next time.